Hello, hello, and welcome to Sacred Democracy. I'm Maddi. Cheers. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so pleased on this Father's Day to welcome Keith Jowers. Keith is the founder of an international nonprofit called Dads for Life. And his goal is to connect dads with their purpose in life, but mostly to keep them connected with their children, their most important purpose in life. And that's his motivation for having started this brilliant nonprofit. And they're celebrating 15 years, right, Keith? This is your 15th year doing this?
Actually, yes, we are actually going in our 16th year.
Wow. Terrific, just wonderful, and a real model for people who want to work with young people, especially dads. As you know, a lot of times with young dads who are either unmarried or divorced, it's very difficult for them to remain in the lives of their children. So that's one of the things that Keith works at through you have your own podcast, right? Through Dads for Life.
Yep. I do. It's called The Dad Connection, Maddi.
Dad Connection. I know. I love that. I absolutely love that. So I really want to turn it over to you to start and to just tell us what you've been working on, what you found. I did have a very interesting discussion with a friend who had been at an interview with a gentleman who works in a government program for this, where some of the young men who are dads who come in are actually mandated to come in. And he was talking about how one of the biggest problems that he sees in that community is a lack of trust in other men and a lack of role models. So I think one of the things you really speak to, at least to me when I've listened to you, is this idea of role modeling. And like we titled the show today, in like the byline for your group is, because they follow our lead. So if we're going to talk about sacred fatherhood or fatherhood, however you want to view it, it is because you are leading by example as a dad or a mom or any grown up in the life of a child. And what this young man was talking about who has this job doing this is that there's simply a problem when there's a vacuum of role models.
That is true, Maddi. I have, first of all, I started the program about 16 years ago, and we started out small. I was working with 4 dads. I was a divorced dad, young divorced dad against my will. I did not want a divorce, but it happened and it came my way. And then I realized that actually I wanted to spend time with my daughter every night. That's why I love my daughter. So I was actually, when I couldn't do that every day, I said, wow, this is going to be tough. How am I going to do this? So I literally just did everything I could to stay in connection with her. Well, years later, I started working with dads who were going through the same thing and just talking to them and encouraging them and saying, you can do this and that kind of thing. Well, then one thing led to another. And then, of course, I was a young boy without a dad because he died when I was 11 years old. So right. I knew the importance of being a father involved in your child's life. So when I started working with these dads, I had no idea it would grow into what it did. Several years later, we would begin Dads for Life. So because I was working with 4 dads, so that's how it all came about. But as a dad, I think it's our responsibility that you have to be involved in your children's life. You got to know what's going on in their life, and that comes through communication and connection and talking to them. You don't wait until they're teenagers and then try to talk to them, because you're going to find out you missed a whole lot in between, right? So I believe that you have to, as a father and a mother, which is quite interesting because we have a lot of single moms follow what we're doing at Dads for Life, Maddi. And that's because great. And one actually, and she encouraged me by saying she's doing this because she's having to do 2 roles. And that really kind of hit me hard, that where we have lost the father connection, so to speak, over the last couple of decades. So, and I've got some statistics we'll learn to in shortly, but it's just connections. No matter what your age your children are, even if they're adults, staying connected with them for life. And that's how you become a dad for life, is starting young.
Yeah. And I think you said too, those connections and responsibility. I think that was one of the things that this young man was talking about with the government position that's sort of similar to what you're doing, is without that male role model, these young men don't really see themselves as needing to be responsible for the children they fathered. And not only do they not have trust and a model, but they don't think, they've never seen it. They've never seen that kind of responsibility in their own lives.
Right. You have to be modeling it, dads, because if you're not modeling it and you're just talking it, they're not going to follow you eventually. They're going to listen to you as a young kid, because you're giving them instructions or whatever and telling them what to do. And what really saddens me the most is when as an officer in the school system for as long as I was, which was 18 years, I heard kids just tell me that all my dad does is bark orders all the time. Mm-hmm. So he's not really involved with him and listening to him and modeling him. He's more just saying, it's going to be basically my rules and, you don't really have a say so. I understand that to a point of just giving them instruction and because a lot of kids, they're going to do whatever they want to if you're not giving them instruction. But
right.
If you're giving them instruction along with modeling it and a whole lot of love that goes along with that and grace, then it's going to turn out better for the whole family.
Well, and I think too I love what you just said, love and grace. This morning I'm at the Poetry and Prayers program that I do on the Women's Oneness Project. I came across these characteristics. Now here, sacred democracy is based on the teachings of the Great Law of Peace, which was brought to the Haudenosaunee people by the peacemaker who is, I believe, a messenger from the Creator. And so what I wanted to talk about was their rules for leadership, and then look at something that's in also Western culture rules. But their rules for leadership are a person should be peaceful, kind, respectful, responsible, honest, unselfish, humble, open-minded, cares for his family, puts his or her family first, and puts others before themselves. So those are beautiful and brilliant. But what I discovered through my brother is part of the Society for Creative Anachronisms. So they're people that do from all walks of life, not just people who have European heritage, right? All walks of life that have fun, bring their kids, go out and do, sword fighting and archery. And archery, by the way, I just read a whole article on how that's one of the best things you can do with children because it teaches them focus and accomplishment. They get to accomplish on their own. And even especially for boys, it's one of the best activities. But in any case, so here are the ground rules from being a knight. Now today, people laugh at that stuff, unless you're involved in something like my brother Ben, and they say, oh, that's old stuff. That's an old culture. We can't listen to that. But listen to these characteristics of a knight. And to me, it's the same as the Haudenosaunee. And I'm sure it's in other cultures too. Loyalty, staying faithful, servant leadership, be willing to serve others. Humility, put others before yourself. A pure heart, set an example in conduct, speech, love, and faith. Honesty, always be truthful. Self-discipline, practice self-control and work to overcome weakness. Excellence, always do your best. Integrity, live by strong moral principles. Perseverance, stick with it to the finish. And 10, have faith in God and purpose. I mean, when I look at there's something called the 8 Power Choices by Carolyn Mace about teaching people how to have and reclaim their own personal power. It's all the same. So I think if we looked at this as universal principles, and of course, boys, what boy, I don't care what your background is, what boy doesn't want to do archery and sword fighting? So if we're specifically talking about raising young men, and what boy hasn't read nowadays Harry Potter or, and this is something where I think we really need to look back at these old teachings. In both cases, they're from older cultures, but they still apply today. And it's a
They
creative,
do.
fun way.
They do, Maddie. And last Christmas time, I was down in Disney World with our daughter and son-in-law and children, and we were trying to get one of their children into the Jedi fights. And I went over there and I was watching the Star Wars program going on, and these little boys and girls were out there with these lifesavers, and they were just swinging them everywhere, and they were like
Right.
showing their power. And I look over and I see some dads just like, yeah, that's my boy or that's my girl. So you're right about that. I mean, that's the current knight. They had their weapon of choice at that point. But I'm just saying that they want to be involved, but they also want to please their dads and their moms, but if we don't make that connection early in life, I wish I'd had that, Maddie, but I didn't have that. So and the reason my dad just died so prematurely, but there was nobody that took up the mantle to show me anything or do anything with me. And I just kind of had to learn on my own.
Yep.
And I didn't realize years later I would be showing a lot of kids, teaching life skills and things to kids, because that's the career I went in with law enforcement, and then I got into the school system of my choice, by the way. So the kids, they want to learn, and we as parents have to have that fortitude to be able to say, I know I'm tired, I just got home from work. But, if your kid says, hey, Dad, you want to just throw the ball around a little bit? Take 10, 15 minutes and go throw the ball with him and spend time with him or her.
Right. And that's really all they want, your attention, right? Isn't that the truth?
That's it.
There was just a call for, in Native America, I just read this on something, I don't know, I read so much stuff, I forget where I read this, but this just came, so maybe it was Facebook, maybe it was an email I got, but there was this call to take all these children under our wing, that if you're an auntie or an uncle, step up to the plate. If you're a grandfather, step up to the plate and embrace your traditional role. I mean, we all come from cultures where 3 generations used to live in the house. So you did have the aunties and the uncles there. You did have the grandparents, but we've lost that. And you had community. When I grew up, I'm about to be 67, but when I grew up, everybody in the neighborhood watched everybody else's kids. I mean, mostly we did have stay-at-home moms. I think we only had one mom that went to work, and a stay-at-home dad. Talk about being ahead of your time. But everybody watched each other's kids. Everybody on both sides of us. We had Aunt Betty and Uncle Joe and Aunt Gertrude and Uncle Jerry. We weren't blood related, but that was the relationship within the community. And it was interesting because I was listening to Greg Braden talk about creating a sustainable society. He's a spiritual teacher and a scientist and all this. And he was talking about creating a sustainable society. And what he says is we have to get localized. That if we are localized with our food sources and we get back to being in a community, then our children and our families have support. We have local food, less pollution in getting food delivered. We have people to teach people how to grow stuff or build stuff. I mean, you have a bigger barter economy in a community. So he was talking about how if we're really talking about a sustainable future, we're not talking about globalization. We're talking about localization and going back to the importance of community and helping each other.
I believe that is so true because, we try to take care of everybody else's problems. And I can't solve everything going on in our country right now. Right. No. But what I can do is when I'm talking one-to-one with a man, I can talk about, the respect and that we have to teach our children and what is the difference. And just because your feelings get hurt, it doesn't mean you go and destroy things and tear up things and that kind of thing. But we have to be more local. But so everybody has their little circle, and you can take care of that circle by being just talking to another man or another lady talking to another lady and encouraging each other. We can't solve the world's problems.
No.
I know there's a lot of people right now trying to, but you're not going to be able to solve all the problems because there's always going to be problems. I did my show on Friday night, and I was talking about how many of these, and I believe in peaceful protesting, but when you go into looting and burning down things and rioting like that, how many out there had no direction growing up from, a parent that was lawful and supposed to be teaching responsibility? How many of them did not get taught that? And then how many actually were taught that, and their parents would be very embarrassed right now if they would come out of that mask and they would see them on TV. So, we have to make sure that we know who our friends are. I mean, who our kids' friends are, who we're hanging around, who they're listening to, the music they're listening to, the things they're seeing. I mean, but without a connection that we have with our children, I honestly believe that we are losing the battle on that if we're not doing that, because they are getting taught somewhere, Maddi.
Yes. And that's the thing. You hit the nail
they really
on
are.
Yeah, they really are. And respect is the key. I know you talk a lot about that. And like if you even look, because nobody's teaching them, if you just look simply at statistics about peaceful protest, the success of peaceful protest versus the not success of anything that involves violence, because it always draws the point away from what you want to make. Then it becomes an argument about, well, you obviously have no respect. It becomes this tussle instead of focusing on whatever your message is. So I think it's the Center for Nonviolent Protest published all these statistics, and really nonviolence succeeds 46% more than violence does in almost any situation. Really, you could say that. But the problem is that we're not teaching people about this idea of, if you respect your community, or the idea of if you're connected to your community, is this the action you're going to take? And also, somebody has to sit down and talk about, this is your choice. That's the other thing is when you have somebody teaching you, one of the things you're talking about, I mean, if there's one thing that my father hammered into my head, and God rest his soul, which I know he's there, but my father, fortunately for me, passed away at 92, was one of the last living World War II veterans. So he just passed away a couple of months ago. But it was always, he always said to us this thing: don't tell me woulda, shoulda, coulda. What'd you do? Don't, if I would ever say I can't, don't want to hear the I can't stuff.
That's right.
And the whole, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I used to teach that. I used to teach that in schools with the kids. I'd say, I can't. And I would definitely bring that about my daughter. I said, can't never could. Can't has to try to be able to do so. So you can't say I can't all the time, because our mindset gets set into believing, oh, I'll never do that. I can't do that. And I'm really preaching to myself right now, because I've been there, I say, oh, that's too hard or whatever. So, but I know that if you continue telling yourself you can't, and I know a man right now, he's in his late 60s, and his dad used to beat him, and he used to tell him, listen, you'll never be worth nothing. You'll be worthless all your life. And, that set in, and that caused that man at the time, to being a young man, to start out, with drugs and alcohol, wound up in robbing people in prison, and, that kind of thing. You just can't do that as a young kid, because it starts giving them a mindset that they're worthless. And you can't let your kids know or believe that they're worthless, because they're not, because, Jeremiah 29:11 says God has a plan for each and every one of us, no matter who we are. But we as parents, especially dads, we have to bless our children, Maddi. We have to let them know they're loved, and they're going to make mistakes, and you might get disciplined for making a mistake, but I'm not going to, make sure it's a lifetime failure.
Right, exactly. And I think, and this lines up so much with new brain research. So I'm also watching this big show on brain research, but it's astonishing to me in this new research on the brain, what happens when you say, I am, I will, I can. I am is the most powerful thing you can say, where you're actually embodying what you want to be. Let's say you want to be an actor, but you're only 12 years old. You're not an actor yet. But if you continuously tell your brain, I am an actor, or I am a fireman, or I am a policeman, or I am a writer. If you continuously tell your brain the I am, then you become that thing. Your brain wires itself to go, okay, yeah. So what are the steps we need to do to get there? Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. And all of that, all of those things that we learn, and I am, of course, huge part of spirituality. That's God, be silent and know that I am, So these things that we've looked at in the past as, especially in the world of scientific materialism, that we look at as, well, that's just mythology. That's just old stuff. Brain research. How about gratitude? Oh my God. The serotonin levels in your brain go up. I was just on the segment I was watching this morning. They talked about how people who are depressed, right? And there's also a whole thing about how antidepressant drugs really don't work, that like the placebo worked as well as the antidepressant. So, but people who are depressed, when you can get them to shift their attitude from depressed to gratitude, from pain to gratitude, just anything negative you're feeling, if you can get that person to get into a state of gratitude, it multiplies. They start to think of more and more, and the more grateful they are, the more serotonin releases in their brain, and the more capable they are of moving forward. So, I mean, this is, you could say we have known this for thousands and thousands of years, but in the sense that, the creator, spirit, whatever you want to name it, has to speak to you in your language for you to hear him or her or it. This is the language that people need to hear now. And all of this quantum physics, all of this brain research is simply reinforcing what we know from spiritual faith. And in the case, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've read some of Dr. Caroline Leaf and studied her a little bit. She talks about the dirty dozen, which is your 12 toxic ways of thinking. Talk about, everything you think about. If you beat yourself up all the time, and you're always putting toxicity in your brain, that's what you're going to believe, and that's what's going to lead to failure. And I used to tell kids all the time, and especially the ones that weren't, in the mainstream education, they were taking some slower, type classes and all. I'd tell them, hey, they would get frustrated some, and I would tell them, listen, you're just as important as anybody else, and you're going to do great things. You just have to continue at your pace. Not everybody works at the same pace.
Right.
No,
right.
I can't type 100 words a minute on the computer like my wife can. Okay. I mean, she's very, very fast for that kind of stuff. I can't do that, but there's things we all can do that makes us special. But when I think about this, Maddi, I think about the prisons that are full of men and women that they live reckless lives because they had no direction.
Yes.
And fathers are extremely important, and so are mothers. And trust me, my dad died at 11. My mom, she kind of kept on me, to make sure that I was doing what I should be doing. I told her I wanted to quit school, and she said, not over, that would only be over my dead body. I said, Mom, we are lost, Dad. I'm not going to lose you, so I'm going to stay in school. And I finished high school. I was the first one in my family to ever finish college. And even with as I moved up that level of education, I had to learn some things on my own, but my mom was the strength there that would encourage me to do whatever I wanted to do. So, I mean, mothers are so important, but our focus, our mission, I mean, my focus is dads, but our message is for the whole family, because if a dad, whether you're divorced or even at home, if you're separated from your children or not, you can still be important to your child's life.
Right.
Just encourage them. And if you have weaknesses yourself, work on them for yourself. So as your child gets older, you can help him or her with theirs.
Exactly. Exactly. And the young man who was interviewed, who has that government job similar to what you're doing, and the whole reason I can't even use his name is because it's a government job, and we have to start telling the truth. I mean, that's the sad thing, is that here he is, telling the truth about what's going on in poor communities, and the things that he sees with kids, especially men, that are mandated to come into his program by the courts. And he's not even given enough money, enough time to really make a difference. There's so much to change, because it's exactly what you just said. It's that they've spent a whole life up to age 18 without the role models, without somebody teaching them how to connect to other people and how to respect other people and how to be respected. That's another thing. I mean, you have to learn, I think, as women, we're a little bit ahead sometimes of certainly of kids that have been raised without parents around or without role models, because we've had to learn to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to be treated that way. But wouldn't it be easier if we raised our children so that our boys respected women, and so that our women demanded or expected respect? And that's what I posted this thing about, how I know it was Frederick Douglass that said it, where he said, it's much easier to raise a strong child than to fix a broken man. And that's something we really have to get back into our culture.
It's so true. The men and women that are in prisons today probably can look back and obviously regret where they've been, but they were wounded by the men who should have first loved them, and they were abandoned by them, and that the father should love them the most. And when you invalidate them as a father, when you can bless them, bless your children, it's gonna save them from a whole lot down the road that they will encounter or not encounter, because you're doing that. If you don't love them, if you don't bless them, if you're blessing them out, so to speak, all the time, they're going to encounter a lot of issues. Many of these people that are in prison, they grew up basically following the same irresponsibility that their own dads did.
Right.
But see, their dad never worked on those issues enough, and it maybe their grandfather, and passed it on down the chain. If you got to break the chain somewhere, over 20 million children in America that are living in fatherless homes today. And it breaks my heart, Maddi, because I think about the future of all that. And I believe that's the real pandemic we got right now. That's an issue that we've got to work on. And even if you don't have any children of your own, or your children are gone, or they're adults, and you've done your job with that, there's a child somewhere that you can encourage and work with and help, and just change maybe the way they're seeing things, because they don't have a child or a father in their life. So, but it's something that we've got to work on as a community. Otherwise, we're going to get worse and worse, in the way we think about things. So,
and and every study, every scientific study everywhere will tell you that the best place to raise a child is within the family. And if you don't have that family core, if you don't have, excuse me, the mother and father at home, then the extended family steps in. That's how we used to be. I mean, aside from that, there was not much divorce. And of course, you don't want women or men staying in a marriage that's abusive, either to them, to the children. But we used to be much more connected to our grandparents and our uncles and our aunts. And so girls from split families did have at least somebody in their life that they could look up to model for, well, this is the guy I'm going to marry. This is the kind of man I want to be with. But what's happened is without community and without family, we are losing any kind of modeling for our children. And I think that is that I totally agree with you. That is a huge tragedy. And it becomes, it's one of those tragedies that goes across every socioeconomic level. It does not matter. It is a pandemic in our country, like you said. It just is there all the time.
Well, Maddi, I mean, research has proven that children desperately need their dad to help them, and there really is no way around that. And the reason there is because in today's America, we have the 20 million children living in fatherless homes, but we also have 90% of homeless who are 90% homeless and runaway children today. We have 85% of children with behavioral disorders. We have 71% of teenage pregnancies, 63% of youth suicides, 85% of youth in prison, and 71% of high school dropouts. Is there a problem? I would say there's a problem. And that's why we as parents or uncles or aunts, however we can affect a child, is we've got to work with them to let them know that you do have a life ahead of you. You just have to, work on some things. I want to help you because dads are so important, or that male role model.
Yeah.
Because a lot of dads, I've had dads actually just say, oh, well, I'll never be able to repair it because I gave up on them years ago when their mom and I divorced. I just kind of let some other man raise him. I'm going like, you got a lot of repair to do, but I mean, start working on it now. I mean, I feel like this, if you're breathing, you got hope. If you're not breathing, well, then we got another thing going there. But I'm talking about if you're breathing, you got hope to repair whatever situation it is. I've talked to men in prison who actually, I told them to start with a letter. Just start with a letter. It might get thrown away, but start again. Just keep writing a letter and trying to repair it because, I've been around people who have passed away right in their last moments. And you don't have men who are asking for more cars or a bigger house or more money.
Yep.
A lot of them talk about things they regret. And a lot of those regrets come from not spending time with their children enough, or loving their children enough, or working too much and not spending time with their children enough.
Yep.
And that is the key. That is where, when you look down the road, I mean, I'm getting on up there too. So I'm going like, okay, I don't know how many more years I got here, but I can tell you this, that, I don't want to look back and say, I didn't spend enough time with our daughter, So, right. But I thought about that years ago. So you can do this, dads, if you just start where you're at. Start where you're at. And that's why Dads for Life is here to encourage and enhance and enrich the life every single day of dads, because their kids need that on a daily basis.
Yeah. And
sorry, I get carried away a little bit, Maddi. So
no, we're fine. We're good. I think, no, we got time. No, I love what you just said. And I think your statistics are shattering. I mean, people really have to internalize that idea that these kids growing up without fathers, look at what's going on. Their chances of having any kind of successful life, and I'm not even talking about making money. I mean, I'm talking about having a happy, flourishing, thriving existence on the planet Earth, right? Depends so much on some kind of strong father influence. I have a friend who's she's a therapist, and I remember her telling me years ago that the hardest thing for anybody to get over, one of the things she hears in therapy all the time from grown-ups, is abandonment. Being abandoned by your parent, either one, but as for, especially with boys, it's men, but being abandoned by your parents it's a heartbreaker, and it has all kinds of ramifications. Even if you ended up being raised by people who loved you, you really don't get, and I'm not talking about adopted kids, that's another matter, but kids whose parents just left them for whatever reason or another, gave them to a grandparent, gave them to an aunt or uncle to raise, but where the child is aware that the parent abandoned them, however that looks, extremely difficult to get over. and changes their behavior for life. So it's just so important. We can't leave them behind. They're our babies.
You talked about adoption. I've known a lot of adoptive parents. A lot of grandparents today are raising kids. I even know of some great grandparents that are having to raise the children. So it's just it can carry on if you don't fix it in your own life, in your own house right then. What I mean is that thank God that they're there, though. Thank God that they, the aunts and the uncles have stepped in. Thank God that the grandparents have stepped in. But they parented different than parenting today's skills are needed. But there's a lot of them just said, I'm just going to step in because I have to. Right. Whether it's because of the a loss of life, or whether it's because of abandonment, or whatever the situation is, or dependency. Drugs and alcohol have played a huge part in the problems we're having today. So, but yeah, it's so important, no matter what role you're in as a parent or grandparent, and loving children is just what we have to do.
Yep. It's what we have to do. Exactly. And I think if this time isolated from each other has taught us anything, it's certainly taught us a lot, but it's the need to be in community with people, the need to be in circle with people is overwhelming. It's like you can only take it for so long. You have to come back together. There's I'm taking this course on restorative justice, which is a very peaceful approach to how do we sit and talk. And that what I find so interesting is the gentleman who came up with what he calls circles, Eric Butler, based this idea all on the ancient traditions of many cultures from Native American cultures, African cultures. All of our cultures have that tradition of families, communities sitting in circle to solve a problem, to listen respectfully, to talk to each other. And that's where what you said earlier about communication is important. If you can model for your kids how to communicate effectively with your spouse, with them, then they grow up knowing how to communicate effectively with the rest of the community. But when you have to start from getting a child who's been abandoned or who has no role model to understand that you care about them, that's a lot of work. We have to commit to it. Obviously, we can't just let a generation of kids disappear, into the prison system. But to gain that trust again, to make them believe that we care is just a commitment. Like you said, you make it in small circles. And that's what Mr. Butler is teaching too. You just do what you can. We can't save the world immediately. There's 7 billion people here and they all have different ideas than you do. But if you can bring people together in small circles, then maybe we can little by little, if you save one child's life, yay you.
Absolutely. A father should love his children, his family from the get-go, and seek the harvest of that for the future. Because he should teach them about integrity and model it first. Life is tough. I don't know anybody that's gone through life at 92 years old like your dad, and he didn't experience some things, that were tough. Yep. And I think about a gentleman like that, and I call him a gentleman's gentleman because, I knew some personally here. They, a dear friend of ours and our 92-year-old dad, or 99-year-old dad, brother, when he passed, I got to thinking about all those times that he and I would just chat, and he never got excited about what's going on around him. He just worked out everything. He had many problems in life, but you know what? He just loved God. He loved his family, and he loved this country, and he fought for the country. So I'm thinking that the more of that we could really teach our children, no matter what you're seeing on one of those 24/7 news channels.
Right.
That's not the truth. That's right. The truth is what is in your heart. And I used to teach some men that were going through a rehab program on a regular basis. And one day I just drew on a whiteboard. I drew the continents. I drew America. I drew the different states, and I drew our Florida, and I drew our city, and I put a little dot in that, Maddie. And I would say, see, the problem with our world is there's a lot of people in our world that think this dot, that the world revolves around that dot, and that dot represents you and me. See, we think the world revolves around us, and it never was meant that way. It shouldn't be that way. And just because we have a difference of opinions doesn't mean that we can't get along. It's just we have to work it out.
Yeah, and if you are honest and you are truthful and you are listening, then the changes that come seem fair. You know, that's what the great peacemaker said. If you want peace, and that's a big question. You really have to ask yourself, do you want inner peace? Do you want outer peace? Because if you want peace, you have to decide, do you want to be right or do you want to be fair? And the only way that you can be fair is if you will listen to other people. Everybody's got their own fears. Everybody's got their own pain. And just because they don't agree with where you are doesn't mean you get hateful towards them. And we have a big problem. One of the biggest problems I see in our country, and this is certainly something that my parents were very much helped us see past. And, you know, because like I said, I graduated in 1971. So, I mean, we were all there for the civil rights movement, for the anti-Vietnam War demonstrations, all the women's liberation movement, all that big stuff happened when I was young. And, you know, like my dad never stopped. My dad worked for the Department of Defense. Okay, get this, was the head of Naval Ship Research and Development with Q clearance while I was marching around protesting the Vietnam War. Now, he, you know, you would think we had some very loud discussions about our opinions on what was going on at the time, but my dad never stopped me from going to a march. Never. We would talk about it a lot. He never stopped me from expressing my own opinion about something. We would talk about it, sometimes very loudly, but there was always that idea that we could talk about it, that we could sit down, have this major difference of opinion, you know, and that no matter what, we were still going to love each other. We were still, and it's a form of respect, allowing your children to express themselves, you know, but also it's a form of guidance to say, well, wait a minute, you know, great idea, but here's my idea, you know, and here's what I know from experience. And if we're raised to look at our elders as if they do have some wisdom, and that's a huge problem right now because of all this stereotyping. Everybody's a stereotype. Old people are bad. Young people are great. You know, this one's bad because of the color of their skin. This one's great because of the color of their skin. It's like there's all this stereotyping going on about every different group of people, and we're not listening and we're not being compassionate towards people who have fears. You know, a lot of the things we object to that people do are because they're afraid or they're misguided. They haven't grown up with guidance, maybe. But where the compassion is something that is also learned from your family and your community. So it's so true, Maddie. And I would, my grandfather, in fact, our studio here is Studio 425. My grandfather lived at an address with the numbers 425. And I remember on that front porch that he and I would, when I taught, especially, I mean, he didn't just lose my dad. They lost 3 children before they died. So, I mean, that was helpful in that family. Mm. But he would tell me, you know, he would talk about treating people right. And it didn't matter what part or what group you were part of, what race you were. If you come walking down his sidewalk in that little country neighborhood, he would say, "Hey, Mr. Jones, are you hungry? Come on, I got plenty of food." It didn't matter who you were. Right. And, you know, because that's the kind of guy he was.
But on that front porch, we sit and talk about honesty and doing the right thing and treating people right and loving your country and those kind of things. But I knew that everything that came out of his mouth was the truth. So when I created the studio, I wanted to find a name. I called it 425 because I wanted to have a place where I could just talk truth, and I won't make up stuff or tell non-truths like that, because I wanted to be, and I wanted to honor his legacy for that, is to be truthful. And I think that's a lot with our airways today. We tell a lot of non-truths out there. And, we just have to be honest with ourselves. And if we're honest with ourselves, we can be honest with our children, and we can be honest with each other, create better friendships and create better relationships in life. If we don't, we're going to have more and more of the same problems that we're seeing in our current day.
Exactly. And starting with being honest with yourself. That's another thing in brain research. You can't make a step forward into being honest with anybody until you're honest with yourself and take responsibility for your actions. The more you blame people, the less power you have. Blaming in the brain is like, it feels really good in your feelings to blame somebody else for your problems. But in your brain, all it does is it takes away your power. You're telling your brain, I have no control over my life. I have no self-discipline. Everything that's going on in my life, I can't do anything about. It's all their fault. It's all her fault. It's all his fault. And the more you blame, the less likely you are to have any kind of power and control in your own life, because your own life is the only place you have any control. I can't control you. You can't control me. Technically, I guess if we were bullies enough, maybe we could for a little while, but it never lasts. If we're really going to create a world at peace, each person really has to follow that guideline of respect and responsibility, taking responsibility. And somebody needs to teach you that. You need to have role models for that. So Keith, we've got go ahead. I was going to say we got about 5 minutes.
Well, role models are awesome. I used to take high school kids and match them up with middle school kids and let them teach them how to be a high school student before they got there. And I think we have to be the best role model is being the dad and being the mom and taking care of the responsibility we should have, that we were given by God. So Once you do that, start there, and don't think you're always right as a parent, because you're not going to always be right, and apologize when you have to. Be transparent and love them. Love conquers all. 1 Corinthians 13 in the Bible talks about that. So
love conquers all. And you can't learn character. You can't get to that higher consciousness. You can't get to those better character qualities we talked about from the Haudenosaunee leadership, from the Knights, from what's in any great religious teaching, any great spiritual teaching. Behind me is the warrior blanket from the Plains people. And they have a whole code of conduct, very similar to what we talked about. You can't be that spiritual warrior for yourself or your kids without taking responsibility and without love. It's all what the difference between a warrior and a soldier is. A warrior fights for love. Not just taking orders, not just going out there, but because of something, someone, community, family, fighting for love. And it's like you said, love conquers all. We got to learn to be more loving with each other, more lovingness.
That's right.
So Keith, again, just remind us of your website, the name of your group, and we'll tune in. We'll get people to tune in.
We are Dads for Life. That's number 4. And we are at dadsforlife.com. You can go to myname.com, keithjowers.com. You can find us all over social media, it's all under the same handle of Dads for Life. And we're here to, like I said, just encourage dads and a lot of moms. Oh my goodness. A lot of moms just to be involved as much as they can and and we come up with themes. And like this coming week, I'm going to talk about be the exception. Be the exception, Dad. Be intentional. You don't, just because your friends say, think that fatherhood's not cool, No, you be the exception. Fatherhood is cool,
Right.
and you can be involved in your kids' lives. So we are here to we can go to our website, check out what we do through public speaking, or we do several things. But whatever we can do to help, I'll reach out. You can do a discovery call with me. I can just talk to you about what's going on in your life with your children, if I can help anyway. And it's just we're here to help, Maddie, just like you and your sister and all that you guys do to help everybody else. And I am honored. My wife and I are honored to be your friends.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, we're honored to be your friends, and it just really is about that community outreach, whatever you can do. I mean, Gandhi said, how do we educate children that are uneducated? And I think this is one of the most profound things he ever said, and it applies across the board. Each one, teach one. Everybody, be the change, of course, is important because that's what everybody always talks about. It's the most quoted line by Gandhi, because of course you have to be the person in the role model that you want your children to see. But I always love that idea of each one, teach one. So if you come across a child that needs your love and attention, give it to them. Because we're not just talking about teaching, reading, writing, arithmetic. We're talking about teaching how to be in the world, which is more important. So if you know that out of your own wisdom, out of your own heart, out of your own family, if you can each one teach one, we change the world. Right?
Absolutely.
And that's what you're doing. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're trying to do here. And that's what Bobby's doing. So thank you, Bobby, for Bobby Lucera, who's our wonderful producer here, who gets us on the air every week. Even with this crisis, we're still here. And thank you, everybody out there, for listening. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you, Keith. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you very, very much. And love to Glenda. So thank you, everybody. I wish you, as always, peace and love and unity. Bye. See you soon. Next week.